The scream split the apartment like glass as Elena Brooks clutched Mia against her chest. Derek Hale spun, eyes blazing, and the door banged shut with a shuddering crack. The sirens outside bled into the silence and made the walls hum. The narrator felt the air thin as Elena said, "You will not take her." Derek said, "You already lost." The lock clicked like a verdict and Mia whispered, "Mom, is it over?" Elena steadied, breathing smoke-thin breaths, and scanned the wrecked room. A lamp lay crooked, pictures tilted, and a toy rabbit stared up from the floor. She traced the bruise of memory where trust had lived. Elena said, "We are safe now," and it sounded like a promise learning to walk. Fear lapped at her heels, but resolve rose harder than stone. In that small storm of sirens and broken frames, she gathered her courage like stitches. The night pressed close, listening for the next move. Somewhere a neighbor coughed, and time came back in slow beats. Elena lifted her chin toward the door and chose to stand. The quiet that followed felt too large for the small room, and Elena gathered scattered bills like fallen leaves. Mia asked where the rabbit had gone, and Elena said, "Right here," lifting it from the floor. The narrator watched the tremor pass through her hands and fade. A clock ticked with the measured patience of a judge. Elena said, "We are going to breathe," and the words stitched the space together. The refrigerator hummed like a low promise that morning would come. Mia said, "Do we have to move again?" and Elena steadied her voice with care. She traced a plan across her mind and pressed it into the edges of fear. She checked the lock and checked it again, letting the click teach her certainty. Rain tapped rhythms that almost sounded kind. Elena said, "We keep going," and set the rabbit at the pillow's edge. Dawn arrived with thin light and the scent of wet concrete as Elena brewed coffee that felt like armor. She opened a window to let the night out and the day in. Mia said, "Can I draw today?" and Elena nodded with a faint smile. The narrator marked how rituals hold broken hours together. On the table, a legal envelope weighted like a stone. Elena said, "We face things one by one," and steam curled upward like resolve. A distant bus sighed, and the city shook itself awake. She packed a lunch with the care of a letter. Mia said, "Will you be there after school?" and Elena answered with steady warmth. She checked the calendar, and the courtroom date shimmered like heat. She breathed until the tremor eased and turned toward the door. The hallway smelled of rain and old paint as Elena walked Mia to the elevator. A neighbor's door clicked open, then shut, careful as a blink. Mia said, "Is Dad mad at us?" and Elena softened her shoulders before speaking. She said, "People get lost, we stay found." The narrator felt the elevator cables hum like nerves. In the mirrored wall, Elena met her own eyes and did not look away. Floors counted down in quiet beats. She told Mia about warm socks and hot chocolate after school. The lobby's glass showed a city rinsed clean but still fierce. Elena said, "We choose safe," and the doors parted with a sigh. Outside, the rain had thinned to a silver lace and traffic murmured like a tired choir. Elena walked Mia to the bus stop and stood under the awning's dripping edge. Mia said, "Can we make pancakes tonight?" and Elena said, "Yes," like a vow. The narrator traced how small plans balance heavy trials. A bus wheezed up, doors folding like wings, and Mia climbed with a brave wave. Elena said, "I love you," and the day seemed to hear it. When the bus pulled away, she held the empty air for a beat. She turned toward the courthouse address written in her phone. The clouds parted a little, and light found her face. She squared her shoulders and stepped into it. Elena's desk carried the weight of unpaid hours, the office fluorescent lights buzzing like a swarm. She overheard whispers at the water cooler, her name folded into sentences about layoffs and replacements. The narrator watched her shoulders tighten as she typed, each keystroke a defense. A supervisor's shadow crossed her cubicle wall and lingered. Elena said, "I'll finish the report tonight," though her throat was dry with fear. In her inbox sat an email from Derek's attorney, bold and cold. Mia's crayon drawing taped beside her screen reminded her of what mattered. She told herself, I can't break here. The chatter grew louder, a rumor about someone pulling strings. The printer jammed, and the sound made her flinch. She straightened, forced a calm breath, and clicked send. In that small motion she drew a line. This job would not take her spirit, even if it tried to take her place. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon, steam curling in tired air. Marissa Clark leaned forward, voice low, saying, You can't let him crush you like this. Elena stirred her tea, though she had no appetite. The narrator felt the warmth of friendship wrap against the sharpness of fear. Elena said, I don't know if I can win. Marissa shook her head, eyes bright with fire, and said, You've already survived worse. The street outside blurred with headlights, strangers rushing, unaware of the storm across this small table. Elena pressed her palms together as though in prayer. The cafe clock ticked slower than her heartbeat. Marissa reached across, squeezing her hand, and Elena whispered, Thank you. The words came out thin, but real. Their silence after carried more weight than any speech. Bills spread across the kitchen table like an accusation, each envelope shouting due dates she could not meet. Elena rubbed her temples, calculator clicking with hollow certainty. The narrator mocked how numbers can break a spirit as easily as words. Mia padded in, holding her stuffed rabbit, asking, Are we okay? Elena forced a smile, said, We are okay tonight. She folded one bill beneath another as though hiding it would erase the sum. The refrigerator hummed, and a bulb flickered above, threatening to give out. Rain tapped against the glass, counting time she could not buy. Elena pressed her pen to the checkbook, ink bleeding in uneven lines. She paused, set it down, and wrapped her arms around Mia, whispering against her hair, You are the reason I keep trying. The pile of bills stayed, but so did her resolve. The courthouse corridor smelled of polish and paper, every step echoing like a gavel. Derek's attorney Simon Kent appeared with a thin smile, voice slicing, We'll prove she can't provide stability. Elena's chest tightened, but her eyes stayed forward. The narrator felt the hallway shrink with his words. Elena said, You don't scare me, though her pulse raced. Simon leaned closer, whispering, This is just the beginning. His briefcase snapped shut like a trap. Elena steadied her breathing, refusing to flinch. A bailiff passed, nodding, reminding her the law had eyes. She walked away, heels striking hard rhythm, carrying both fear and fire. In her silence was a promise. She would not surrender. The corridor swallowed their figures, but the war had just found its battleground. The apartment felt heavy as Elena closed the door and leaned against it, tears waiting at the edge but not falling. She walked into the bathroom, water running, mirror fogging, reflection fragile but unbroken. Mia's laughter from the other room spilled like sunlight, unaware of the storm. Elena whispered, You deserve better, though only the mirror heard. The narrator traced the cracks in her mask, how strength sometimes hides behind silence. She splashed her face, let the cold sting, then drew in air as though it was new. The weight pressed, but she stood straighter. The apartment walls, chipped and thin, still held their safety. She opened Mia's door, kissed her forehead, and whispered, Sleep well, love. That night, Elena let herself cry quietly, where no one else could see, and in the hush she began to rebuild. Elena opened the spreadsheet, but the numbers blurred as a notification slid across her screen. A message thread glowed with her name, and a file name she recognized. The narrator felt the room tip when she saw Tyler Gray listed above Derek Hale. Elena said, No, not you, to the monitor, voice small but steady. Another message arrived, promising documents to Simon Kent before the hearing. Trust cracked like thin ice. She scrolled and found her own email attached, forwarded at midnight. She remembered Tyler's pep talks and late help with reports. The kindness now looked staged. Elena said, You sold me, and the words tasted like metal. Fluorescents hummed as if they approved. She printed the thread and slipped the pages into a folder. The printer's heat stung her fingers, urging movement. She stood, spine lengthening, and the betrayal settled into focus. At home, the kettle rattled while Elena argued in a hushed tone over the phone. Derek said, "Your friend knows what you hide," and the words slithered through the line. The narrator watched Mia pause in the hallway, clutching the rabbit. Elena said, "Stay away from my case," but the quiet after felt like a dare. The kettle screamed, and she killed the flame with shaking fingers. Mia asked, "Are we in trouble?" from the doorway. Elena softened, saying, "We are together," and tried to pour calm into a cup. The steam fogged her glasses, hiding the tremor in her eyes. The phone buzzed again, relentless as rain. She silenced it, slid it face down, and knelt to Mia's height. She said, "We choose safe," and the air steadied by degrees. Outside, a siren passed like a warning that kept going. Night stretched thin, and the phone fractured it with sharp rings. Unknown caller burned across the screen. Elena let it ring, then answered to silence that smiled. Derek said, "Court's love proof," and hung up. The narrator felt the walls breathe with her. She locked the door again, then again, as if certainty were a chain. Messages stacked, each one a small shove. She typed a record of every call with times and words, building a ledger of harm. The apartment settled, but her heart would not. She said, "I will not be hunted," and the page trembled under her pen. A neighbor's TV laughed next door, the sound obscene in its ease. She set the phone in a drawer and slid it shut with care. In the hush, her resolve grew teeth. She opened the laptop and saved copies of everything. She would bring light to every shadow he sent. Morning brought a knock that sounded official. Ruth Daniels stood with a clipboard, eyes assessing without malice. The narrator marked Elena's breath steady as she opened the door wider. Ruth said, "I'm here for a welfare check," and stepped in with careful shoes. Elena guided her through rooms that were small but tended. Mia showed a drawing of a sun with too many rays. Ruth asked about school, meals, and sleep. Elena answered with clear details and calm voice. A clock ticked like a metronome for truth. Ruth said, "I will note cooperation," and her pen moved with crisp strokes. Elena offered documents and schedules, the paper humming with proof. The visit ended with a brief nod that felt like weather shifting. When the door closed, the air felt lighter, though the storm still circled. By afternoon, Elena sat at the dining table with files spread like a battle map. She labeled folders for calls, messages, finances, and school. The narrator watched her posture align with purpose. Marissa texted saying, "I'm here," and a lift touched the room. Elena said, "No more surprises," to the empty chair across from her. She practiced answers to questions she feared, shaping truth into steady lines. Outside, clouds stacked like gray armor. She printed the thread from Tyler again, highlighting the dates that mattered. She thought of Mia's drawing and tucked it into the front pocket of her binder. She said, "We fight clean," and the words landed with weight. The noise of the city slid under the door, a march she could use. She closed the binder and pictured the courtroom. The fear was still there, but it no longer led. Evening shadows stretched across Elena's kitchen when the phone buzzed with a number she had not seen in years. The narrator felt her hand tremble as she answered. A deep voice said, "Elena, it's Gabriel." Her breath caught, name like a key to doors long locked. He said, "I heard what you're going through." She pressed her palm against the counter, whispering, "Why now?" His reply came steady, "Because you need help." The kettle clicked off behind her, forgotten. She said, "I don't know if I can trust you." His silence carried weight heavier than words. The narrator marked the storm of betrayal and hope colliding inside her. Elena said, "If you were here to play savior, I don't need one." Gabriel answered, "I'm here to make sure you don't stand alone." The line stayed open, buzzing with unfinished history. The diner booth creaked as Elena slid in, across from Gabriel, who waited with coffee untouched. The narrator noted the years carved into his face, lines of regret. Elena said, "You left when we needed you most." Gabriel looked down, voice rough. "I thought I was protecting you." The hum of conversations filled the silence between them. She traced the rim of her cup, eyes sharp. He said, "I've been watching from a distance." Elena snapped, "That's not the same as being here." The waitress poured water, her clinking glass marking the pause. Gabriel leaned forward, saying, "I know things about Derek's case. Let me help." The words hung like bait. Elena's heart pushed against her ribs, anger and possibility wrestling. She said, "If you betray me again, it's over." His nod came slow, heavy as stone. Later, in Elena's apartment, Gabriel spread old documents across the table. The narrator marked her hesitation as she leaned in. He said, "Derek has debts tied to dangerous people." Elena traced the papers, ink smudged with years. She asked, "How did you get these?" Gabriel said, "I was closer than you knew." His words carried both warning and confession. The judge hummed, the only sound between them. Elena whispered, "All these years, you hid." He said, "I thought it would spare you." Her laugh broke bitter. "It cost me everything." His eyes met hers, raw with guilt. The narrator caught the air, thick with truths not yet spoken. Elena gathered the papers into a neat pile, voice steady. "Then we use this to fight." Gabriel nodded, his silence agreement deeper than words. The park bench was slick with mist when Elena met Marissa after midnight. She showed the papers, voice low. "Gabriel says Derek owes dangerous men." Marissa's eyes widened, hand covering her mouth. The narrator noted how friendship can steady trembling truths. Elena said, "I don't know if I can trust him." Marissa leaned closer, whispering, "Maybe trust isn't the point. Maybe survival is." The streetlight buzzed, insects circling. Elena's breath clouded in the cold. She said, "If I use this, Derek will come harder." Marissa replied, "Then you hit back harder." The silence stretched as the city hummed, distant and uncaring. Elena folded the papers into her coat, whispering, "This changes everything." The bench groaned under their weight, as if the night itself knew secrets had shifted. Back home, Elena laid the papers beside Mia's drawing on the dresser. The narrator traced her pause, how both were fragile treasures in different ways. Gabriel lingered in the doorway, voice low. "This is only the start." Elena said, "I don't want Mia touched by any of this." He replied, "That's why I came back." Her jaw clenched, resolve flashing. She said, "If you hurt us again, I'll burn every bridge myself." His silence agreed. The clock ticked steady in the background. Elena smoothed the drawing with her fingertips, whispering to herself, "For her, always." Gabriel turned to leave, shadows swallowing him. She stood straighter, binder in hand, her reflection in the mirror fierce. The narrator marked the shift. She no longer feared the storm. She was becoming the storm. The courtroom breathed in drafts of paper and worry as Elena placed her binder on the table. The narrator counted her heartbeats while Simon Kent arranged exhibits like traps. Derek Hale watched with a smile that never reached his eyes. Elena said, "Facts first," and smoothed a page until it lay quiet. A clerk called the case and the room sharpened. Simon said, "We will show instability," and the word hung like a hammer. Elena steadied, recalling Mia's drawing tucked in her folder. The judge's gaze moved over faces like a lighthouse beam. Elena said, "I have records," and lifted call logs that shook only once. The air tightened as chairs creaked and pens tapped. She felt the floor under her shoes and chose to root there. Derek took the stand with practiced ease, voice warm as velvet over ice. He said, "I worry about our daughter's stability," and looked down as if burdened by care. The narrator heard the lie glide without friction. Simon guided him through gentle questions that painted Elena as a storm. Derek said, "I offered help," and let the silence imply refusal. Elena felt anger rise and then pass, like a wave that breaks but does not drown. She marked each falsehood on a list, one line, one breath. The judge lifted an eyebrow at a missing date. Derek stumbled, then smiled too wide. Elena said, "Please note Exhibit C," and the paper answered with ink that would not smear. Truth waited, patient as stone. Cross-examination cut the room into cleaner lines. Elena rose with papers clipped and numbered. She said, "On this date you were out of state," and set the phone records beside his story. The narrator watched Derek's jaw notch, then smooth. She added, "And these messages contradict your claim of support." A murmur rolled, and then stilled. Simon objected, but the judge waved him back with a measured hand. Elena breathed, counted to 3, and asked again, simple and exact. Derek said, "I must have misremembered," and the phrase landed thin. She let the silence after expand until it found the corners. The ledger of calls gleamed like a spine. The room learned her steadiness. Recess arrived like a small island in a rough sea. In the corridor, Mia ran into Elena's arms, breath quick and warm. The narrator felt time soften as Elena said, "I'm here." Marissa stood watch by the vending machines, eyes scanning for trouble. Mia whispered, "Do they think we are bad?" And Elena's answer was a blanket. She said, "We are brave, and brave looks different on different days." A bailiff passed with a nod that felt like human weather. Marissa said, "You are landing every point," and the words threaded steel through Elena's spine. She knelt to tie Maya's shoelace with a surgeon's care. The hallway light turned kinder for a moment. She rose when the buzzer called them back. The final session of the day pressed close, but Elena felt a hinge turn inside. She said, "These are financial records linked to Derek's debts," and placed copies with careful hands. The narrator noted the hush that follows a new map. Simon's smile thinned while he read. Elena continued, "These debts coincide with threats I receive." The judge leaned forward, curiosity replacing fatigue. Derek shifted, chair grazing the floor with a rough scrape. Elena said, "I seek safety and stability for Mia," and let the words sit without ornaments. Paper, dates, and voices aligned like a constellation. She looked at the clock and did not flinch. The gavel called time, and the room exhaled. She gathered her binder, not lighter but stronger. The courtroom air turned heavy as Elena rose with new evidence. The narrator marked the silence sharpen when she laid Derek's forged receipts before the judge. She said, "These documents conflict with bank statements," voice steady as steel. Simon Kent shifted, objecting, but the judge leaned forward, asking Derek for explanation. Derek's jaw flexed as his eyes flickered to the page, a crack in his performance. Elena said, "The truth leaves trails," and the paper glowed under harsh light. A murmur stirred among those seated. Derek muttered, "It's a mistake," but the word felt weak. The judge's pen scratched with deliberate patience. Elena stood tall, binder closed with a decisive snap, and the storm turned in her favor. The cross-examination pressed deeper. Elena's lawyer placed the phone transcripts on the projector. Derek's late-night messages appeared, each a nail in his crafted mask. The narrator heard the room exhale as lies peeled away. Derek said, "That wasn't me," but his voice cracked. Elena whispered to herself, "Keep breathing," while eyes turned toward him. The judge asked, "How do you explain these records?" Derek's silence stretched too long. Simon leaned in, whispering fast, but Derek snapped, "Enough!" The outburst rippled, shattering his calm facade. Elena sat straighter, courage anchored by truth. The judge scribbled another note, her pen moving faster now. The room fell into thick silence as the judge gathered the evidence into neat stacks. Elena's pulse slowed, but her chest burned with weight. The narrator felt time stretch as she whispered, "For Mia." The judge asked both sides for final statements. Elena rose, binder close to her chest, and said, "I have shown truth, and truth protects my child." The air trembled with the quiet certainty of her words. Simon tried to rally, but his tone cracked under the judge's gaze. Derek sat rigid, sweat at his temple, silence his only weapon left. The gavel struck once to mark recess before the decision. Elena sank into her chair, shaking but unbroken, her hands clasped tight as prayer. Outside in the corridor, Derek cornered Elena, voice low and venomous. He said, "You'll regret dragging me through this." The narrator caught her stillness as she turned. She replied, "You regret yourself enough for both of us." His fist clenched at his side, but he stepped back when Gabriel appeared at the end of the hall. Gabriel's stare cut through the distance, silent promise of protection. Marissa moved to Elena's shoulder, whispering, "He's unraveling." The bailiff's approach ended the moment. Elena said, "I don't break," and walked toward the courtroom doors with her head lifted. Derek remained in shadow, a storm without ground. The final hearing opened with tension like wire pulled taut. Elena stood for her closing words, voice calm but carrying iron. She said, "This is about Mia's safety, not revenge." The narrator marked the room soften, hearing her truth unadorned. Derek tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Elena continued, "I have faced betrayal, but I have not failed my child." Simon's shoulders sank as the weight of defeat pressed in. The judge leaned back, eyes on Elena longer than on any other. The gavel struck once more, promising an answer tomorrow. Elena exhaled as if lifting a mountain, and when she sat, Maya's drawing peeked from her binder like a sun-breaking cloud. Morning arrived with a hush that felt like a held breath, and the courtroom gathered its edges around the final moment. The narrator watched Elena's fingers rest on her binder, steadier than before. The judge read the decision with careful cadence, each word a step across thin ice. Elena said, "Whatever comes, we stand," and the room seemed to listen. Derek stared at the floor, shoulders braced against a verdict he could not shape. The order granted Elena full custody with supervised visitation and protective conditions. A soft murmur rose, then fell, like a tide respecting the shore. Elena closed her eyes once, letting relief move through her like warm light. She whispered, "For you, Mia," and the weight she carried changed its name to duty. In the corridor, sound returned in footsteps and distant doors, and Elena stood very still as the meaning settled. Marissa reached her first and said, "You did it," with a grin that shook. The narrator traced Elena's smile, small but real, arriving like sunrise through fog. Gabriel stepped closer, careful as a bridge, and said, "Proud of you." Elena answered, "Thank you for showing up," and the words did not tremble. A bailiff nodded respect as he passed by. The order folder felt lighter in her hands, not because it weighed less, but because she no longer carried it alone. She said, "We go home now," and the corridor seemed longer in a good way. Outside the glass doors, the day held together, waiting for them to walk into it. Home smelled like coffee and crayons, and Mia's laughter ran ahead of her feet as she burst from her room. Elena kneeled and said, "We are safe," and the words landed like a key in a lock. The narrator felt the apartment breathe easier as windows caught the pale sun. Mia asked, "Do we stay here?" And Elena said, "Ice, we stay." Gabriel set a new chain lock on the door, while Marissa unpacked groceries with brisk care. The ordinary details finally felt like a future. Elena taped the order inside a kitchen cabinet where she could see it when doubt tried to return. She said, "Pancakes tonight," and Mia cheered with both hands. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was space to grow. Evening folded in gently, and Elena called Ruth to confirm the new terms. Ruth said, "Compliance looks strong," and the line clicked with quiet approval. The narrator mocked how validation can feel like fresh air in a stale room. Elena opened her laptop and drafted a budget plan that did not apologize. She set reminders for school meetings and therapy consults, building a scaffold for calm. Marissa set plates on the table while Mia sprinkled blueberries like stars. Gabriel lingered by the window, watching the street with a guardian's patience. Elena said, "We rebuild slow and right," and the room answered by holding steady. Outside, the city dimmed without menace. Inside, the calendar began to look like a life. Night settled soft, and Elena paused at Mia's doorway, listening to the gentle tide of sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "We are stronger now," and the promise fit perfectly. The narrator noticed the rabbit on the pillow, stitching past to present without pain. She stood by the window and let the quiet hold her without testing her edge. The city offered distant sirens that no longer sounded like threats. She messaged Gabriel and Marissa a simple thank you, then set the phone face down. The apartment felt new without changing a thing. Elena said, "We will not stop fighting," and the words were not a warning anymore. They were a map.